Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have as my guest today, Alyson Stover. Alyson, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So Allison is an associate professor in the Department of Occupational Therapy at the University of Pittsburgh. She earned her juris doctorate in law with a postgraduate certificate in health law from U of P. Her day-to-day client practices focus on using occupation, self-advocacy, and role defining to create a path to healing for individuals who've experienced intimate partner violence, sexual trauma, and PTSD. A survivor of trauma herself, her focus areas of practice expertise include trauma-informed occupational therapy and holistic approaches to substance use disorder. And she is an AOTA, Association of Occupational Therapy of America.
The American Occupational Therapy Association.
Board certified in pediatrics. Awesome. Allison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So you are like certified and degreed up the yin yang, but with a very specific focus.
Yes.
Which is really interesting. So we'll get to that. But before we do, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yes. So I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I spent a number of years in my youth traveling around to see where home should be, which ended up being back near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I'm now just northwest of Pittsburgh in Mercer County. So we are a rural county in between Pittsburgh, PA, and Cleveland, Ohio.
Nice. Originally from the East Coast, originally from New York, and spent a lot of time in Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah.
And so forth. So very accustomed to that. So let's get into this here. How did all this start for you?
So when I was young, I grew up in a very large and very connected family, much like Pittsburgh families usually are. So cousins were more like siblings, aunts were more like other mothers, uncles more like other fathers. And when I was about 11 years old, my cousin, who was almost 5 at the time, and was like a little sister to me, had experienced a traumatic brain injury. Kept her in the hospital for over 2 months. She went in, your typical run around, play around, have fun, almost 5-year-old. And by the time she left, we were told that she likely would never walk again, talk again, that most of her sensory systems would be impacted, so she wouldn't see, hear, or speak. Robin did an amazing amount of work over her lifetime. She's now in her mid-30s, but she does talk, she does walk, she does.
What happened to her, Allison?
She had experienced essentially an error with medication, and it put her into a coma, and the coma lasted for over 48 hours. And in that time, her brain just sort of started to shut down.
So that's how she got the TBI.
Yep, that's how she got the TBI.
Okay, so not from a fall or a crash, but wow.
No,
okay.
So she was having what we thought was just like maybe a really prolonged experience of a cold. And when we went in, it was really that her kidneys were shutting down, and she had a kidney disease. And during the biopsies and some of the testing for kidney disease, she experienced this adverse reaction to some of the drugs that they had to use, and it put her into a coma. So I was very much a part of Robin's healing journey. She was very much a part of my life journey. And so I got to watch as she participated in all types of rehabilitation. And I fell in love with occupational therapy. But it wasn't just occupational therapy that I loved. I loved that there were people in the world that gave my cousin and my aunt and my uncle a voice when it felt like no one else was listening to them. I felt like I really appreciated that my cousins, her siblings, were experiencing life differently than I was, growing up in a household that was so overwhelmed with doctor appointments and medical emergencies and unpredictableness, that I knew I wanted to practice occupational therapy, but I knew I needed to do it in a way that really was holistic, not just for each client that I encountered, but that allowed me to be holistic for the environment in which every individual lived, recognizing and representing that it's never just the client experiencing the disease, the disability, the illness, the trauma, but really everybody that is connected to and loving with that individual. And so
if I may, how old were you at this time when you recognized this?
So I was 10, 11 when Robin got sick. And I was about 15 years old when I decided I really needed to pursue this career moving forward. And so wow. I was pretty young and had determined that this was what I was going to do. I was going to be all of the good people that brought success to Robin and her family, but I was going to be all of those good people in one practitioner.
Hence your incredible bio. That's so friggin' inspiring. So, wow. First of all, so sorry to hear about your cousin. I mean, there's no other word. It's tragic. So you're 15 at this time. How did things unfold for you?
So I then became one of Robin's primary respite care providers. So I would spend a week at a time with her, alleviating some of the responsibilities of my aunt and uncle so they could take a vacation, they could get some respite, as well as some of her siblings. And that became sort of my work journey at that point. I participated in a lot of the camps that she was a member of. I would volunteer, help out. I would go on vacations with her so that she sort of had that one-on-one with her at all times. And I started to explore what occupational therapy training looked like. So I entered the University of Pittsburgh as an undergraduate, and I got a bachelor's in rehabilitation science, really learning all of the very medical components of healing, wellness, journey, rehabilitation. And then I went immediately on to getting my master's in occupational therapy. And became an occupational therapist in which I practiced primarily in pediatrics. So I lived in California for a little bit. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina for a while before returning back home to Pittsburgh. And while I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, that's where I was really introduced to the idea that Robin was not unique in her experience. Her home was not unique in their experience, that there's often more than just a developmental disability or an illness or an injury that's occurring in a child's life that is preventing them from really being able to experience wellness to their full capacity. And so I started to really investigate what were the things that were really large barriers to the children that I was working with and their ability to experience that wellness, that they could do what they wanted, when they wanted. And so I discovered that I had, at that point, over 50% of my caseload was not living with a biological parent, and meaning that they were either in foster care or living with a kindred caregiver. So I recognized that there was a disconnect or a separation from biological parents that was having an impact. And then I started to recognize that as I went through a variety of their medical history, people were very honest. And the recognition of the number of children who had who had parents or caregivers who were experiencing substance misuse to some capacity was actually greater than 50%. I knew that a number of the children I was working with had experienced poverty, and I recognized that there were a variety of things that were happening in the home that were very adverse to their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I started to discover that I needed to really become that advocate. I needed to recognize that I could provide services, resources, healing that went beyond my traditional occupational therapy skills. So for instance, maybe there was a child that could receive more services or better health care if it was affordable. And so I would help to connect them with maybe a Medicaid product and getting them signed up and registered for that. Perhaps their family didn't know that they were eligible for another resource benefit, or that there was a church that had an incredible program that provided respite for parents for free. I knew how to investigate my community because Robin taught me that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I knew what a person needed because I and my family had experienced those very same needs. And so I just used the way we investigated our community when we were raising Robin and started to investigate my community for the children and the families that I was working with. It was during this time that I started to encounter so many no's that I just wasn't expecting. Like, this child could really benefit from additional support in the school system, and I thought they should be eligible for an individualized education plan. But then we'd be told no, and so suddenly the advocate in me felt very much like, wait a minute, but I know how to assess the child and what the child needs. I know how to assess the environment and say what's missing. And I looked at the community and I know what resources are available. What do you mean no? And that's what really propelled me to go to law school. And
All right, let me pause you for a second. Where's your cape?
No.
Come on. I'm like listening to you and I'm thinking, my God, Allison, I mean, you're so amazing and inspiring. It's crazy. Now, you talked about, you discovered that there were these other elements that existed in a lot of the clients you were working with. Now, are you saying that these elements were already existing within their lives prior to the situation that caused them to be debilitated? Or is there kind of a cause and effect or correlation or what?
Sometimes they were existing before. Sometimes it existed as a consequence of. Sometimes it just both started to happen sort of simultaneously. There was I can't tell you what happened first or what came next. What I can tell you is that that when a child would come to see me, they might be referred for something that people recognize occupational therapy for. Like they have trouble tying their shoes or buttoning their clothes or writing their name. But then as I would start to work with that child to form a rapport and a relationship with them, I would hear about things like I had a child whose father was incarcerated for murdering his mother, and he was 5. And so he talked a lot about missing mom and about missing dad and about not being allowed to even visit dad. And I realized, like, no, he couldn't write his name, and he was having trouble tying his shoes. And we would certainly work on those motor skills. But there was likely some other elements of his life that were influencing that developmental delay. And that was largely connected to some of the trauma that he was experiencing in his environment around him. Or the idea that there were times that children, I would see children because they had very restrictive diet. They weren't eating very many foods. They had never had a fruit or a vegetable. And then when I would start to work with them, I would come to realize, sorry, that's my dog. I would come to realize that it's not that they didn't like the fruit or the vegetable, but rather that they had never been in a home where fruits and vegetables were available to them.
All right, let's just pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. All right, we are back. Let me ask you something. Can you give our listeners a brief kind of thumbnail of what occupational therapy is?
Sure. So that's one of my favorite things. Hold on one moment.
Sure. She's checking her dogs. Oh, those huskies?
Those are Tamaskins. So they are Husky, German Shepherd, Malamute, and Wolf Dog.
Wow.
Yeah, they're definitely an interesting group. But so occupational therapy, what we really work for is we define occupations differently than most people. So occupations are anything you need to do, you want to do, or you're expected to do. And we recognize that at least 50% of your life, really 51% of your life, has to be filled doing occupations that are meaningful, purposeful, and psychologically rewarding to you. So I often say, like, I need to do laundry, but I hate doing laundry. And so doing laundry once a week for my home, I can still experience wellness. But if I worked at a laundromat and I had to do laundry 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, I probably wouldn't be experiencing wellness, because even though I could do it, it wasn't rewarding or meaningful or purposeful to me. So occupational therapy really evaluates the person and says, hey, what is it that you need to do, you want to do, you're expected to do? And by the way, is that meaningful and purposeful to you? And then if you're not doing those things, what can we change? Can we change the way you do it so that you can be more independent with it? Maybe we just need to change the environment and how things are set up around you so that you can do it. Or maybe we can strengthen an actual skill within you so that you can do it. Or maybe we do a little bit of all three. But our goal is to get every person doing, because most healthcare practitioners believe that you must be well or get well in order to do. Whereas occupational therapy believes you must do in order to get well.
And be able to do in order to get well. I worked with occupational therapists when I was in my first position at a graduate school. We were working in a facility where we were assessing and treating young kids who were showing early signs of psychosis. I was part of a team. And one of those members we had a few occupational therapists, and I really became to understand and appreciate the incredible work they do. So I have a lot of appreciation for what you do and the role you play there. So you were talking about along the way, you were discovering in your path, well, okay, what about this element? So let me focus on this, and this element, let me focus on this. And I think you were right about to get into the subject of law. So yeah, continue.
So I started to get too many no's. So I could assess the need, I could find the resource, but then when I asked to apply the resource to the need, I'd be told no. And so I wish there was a more exciting story, but I was actually on vacation with a friend at the beach, and she had just graduated from law school, and we were playing games, enjoying the beach, and I was complaining about this, and she said, well, if you think you know the pathway so well, why don't you just go to law school and be the person who gets to say yes? And I thought, okay. So probably not the best way to decide to go to law school, but 2 weeks later, I sat down for the LSAT, and within 6 months, I was admitted to and going to law school.
Oh my God. Okay. Wow.
It was in law school that, so I moved from North Carolina back to Pittsburgh to go to the University of Pittsburgh. I'd say it's more than my alma mater. I think I bleed blue and gold. And I moved back home with my parents. At the time, I was married, and my husband had decided that while I was in law school and I was also working for Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh as an occupational therapist, that maybe he needed a little more in his life. So he asked if we could have a baby. So we got pregnant, and about 5 months into the pregnancy, my husband at the time told me that his girlfriend was not happy that we were having a baby. So I said the good news is he could just go be with his girlfriend. So it was then in my first.
Wait. So he said you didn't know. Did you know about this girlfriend? Okay.
No.
Okay.
So I had no idea. I was going to law school full time. I was working 25 hours a week for Children's Hospital as an occupational therapist, and being pregnant and trying to study. And so I separated from my husband at that time and had my baby by myself. Well, I'll never say have my baby by myself. Had my baby with my mom, my dad, my brother, my cousins, that huge family that I talked about was all around us. And so after that first year of law school, I spent working, figuring out how to understand the law, and had a baby. And then from there, I was able to really start to specialize in certain areas of the law, and recognizing that I didn't like writing legislation. So I didn't want to write legislation, but I did like articulating what legislation could look like in the lives of real people. And so I started to work at the Health Law Clinic, which was a free clinic offered by the University of Pittsburgh to individuals who were getting the no's that my clients were getting when I was an occupational therapist. And so I was able to help people obtain Social Security, disability income and benefits, to obtain IEPs for children in the school systems, and be able to either design ways that maybe guardianship wasn't exactly the best mechanism, and could we do something like power of attorney that still allowed some level of independence and choice in the person, versus just sort of stripping people away from all of that by moving them into a restrictive guardianship relationship. And so I did that for 3 years through law school, graduated, met my husband now, who is my forever husband, I say. We got married, and he lives in Mercer County. And so I moved to Mercer County. And that's where I really started to see that I had the benefit of living in well-resourced cities before. So although I was frustrated that I could not connect resources to people easily, and that I often got to know that at least there were resources that existed. Mm-hmm. I was in Pittsburgh. I was in Charlotte. I was just north of Los Angeles. So these were places where there was an abundance of resources. I came to Mercer County where, you're an hour and a half from a city, which is a really long way to go for simple resources like, if there's a shelter to get sleep that night, or if there's a program that can offer food. So that's when my husband and I decided that, well, if I knew how to connect people and resources, then we should probably know how to be the resources too. So we opened our private pediatric practice in Mercer County and started to provide resources. We offer occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, advocacy services, and then we provide a variety of community programming. So where there's a need, we try to fill.
Okay. Listening to you talk, Allison, it's not just incredible, but I mean, to say that not a lot of people do what you do is it just is obvious. you talked about your family, your large family, that intense bond, but obviously something has been driving you all along. Talk about that.
So occupational therapy, we take a look at all the things that motivate people, and values and beliefs are something that we integrate into our sessions often. I've always been raised with a really strong faith. So I was raised by parents who introduced me to a faith that said that God lives in every person, and that your job is to be the kindness and the goodness and the love that is purely in God to everybody you encounter. So there's a very well-known Bible verse about, but Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? And when did we see you cold and clothe you and hurt? And he said, at any time you have seen or done to the least of these, you have done for me. And that's sort of what's always driven me, is that I've actually been given, this is a gift to be able to have skills that I can give to these people, that when they are hungry, they know they can come to me and I can help get the food. So I've always been driven by this idea that it's God living in me, and that it's a gift that I am so privileged and honored to share.
Yeah. So right now, what's the name of your organization or your facility?
So our outpatient pediatric practice is called Capable Kids. And this is where we have we sort of had two goals with Capable Kids. One was that we knew that the children of our community needed access to specialized resources that could recognize not just developmental delays or disabilities associated with childhood, but also then needed to understand what that looks like in the context of very complex home and community environments. It's not the same thing. I can do a feeding treatment in one place, but I can't ask that a family that, has $37 every other week to spend on food, to spend 15 of that on fruits and vegetables that a child isn't going to even eat, right? Mm-hmm. So it was understanding not just the disabling or disability condition of the child, but how do that I meet that child's needs in the complex environment in which they are. The other part of that was we have a great community, but we didn't have these really the jobs that we had were not ones that really helped to build careers. There weren't like career ladder jobs. And so we had incredible people who lived here, and they went away and they gained these skills and social work and occupational therapy and physical therapy, but there was nowhere to come home and let your community benefit from what you've learned. And so we wanted to be a place that you came to with the recognition that you were going to be supported in professional development, that we were going to build professional ladders for you, opportunities for you to engage in state and national leadership, do some education as far as being able to continue on in an instructor or an adjunct professor kind of role. So that's what we established in Capable Kids, was this place that understood the needs of children in complex environments, but also understood the needs of people in the community and how they wanted to build and grow in their careers. From there, we recognized that we still felt barriers, right? So we were Capable Kids. We treated children birth to 21 years old, but when you found that child that you're working with has a parent or a caregiver or a sibling or a grandparent that's taking care of them and also could really benefit from the use of things like sensory integration or routine development or role development, but they were over 21, what did we do? So we developed Capable Families, which is a nonprofit, and the nonprofit designs and develops occupation-based community programming. So we've run a program for individuals who've experienced sexual trauma, where we were able to collaborate sexual trauma therapists with occupational therapy practitioners and do a very collaborative 12-week program for healing and wellness. We were able to collaborate with an intensive outpatient opioid use program, and we did a chronic pain and opioid recovery program together with them. So we just now use Capable Families as our mechanism to be able to provide those resources that for some reason we get told no in the Capable Kids arm.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people listening to this are therapists of all kinds. My guess is a lot of them really aren't too familiar with occupational therapists, quite frankly. How do occupational therapists and mental health therapists, how can they work together? What are some ways that they might do that?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So I always say that in the work that I do, particularly with individuals who've experienced trauma or individuals who may participate in substance misuse, is the idea that they should always have a mental health counselor as well, and we should be working together. So there are things like I talked about. Many mental health counselors are familiar now with the terms of sensory processing and understanding if a child overactive, they might need heavy work, or if a child is very resistant, they might be hypersensitive to touch. They don't like the way certain things feel. But we know that trauma affects the sensory processing very differently. So it might not be that I'm hypersensitive to touch. It may be that the sexual trauma that I experienced has created a unique fear to certain types of touch or certain feelings. Like if I were in a very comfy flannel sheet bed, I might really have a hypersensitivity to the flannel sheet touch now, right? Mm-hmm. And so that complex understanding of the sensory system is something that is really expert in occupational therapy professionals. But then we can collaborate with the mental health professional because they truly understand sort of the emotional experience or emotional response to it. So we can prepare their bodies so that they can do the mind work, or they can do the mind work and then we can calm the bodies. But, we hear a lot about how the body keeps score as a book, and how the body has its own responsiveness to what the brain is telling a person that they are experiencing in their world. Well, I see mental health counselors and occupational therapy professionals being the perfect unification of a mind-body professional experience. I can really integrate how they can build a routine, structure a habit, identify meaningful and purposeful occupations, and then I can figure out how they can do them in those environments while the mental health counselor is processing through the trauma, the emotions, the coping mechanisms, how to move forward, how to continue on the healing journey. So a mental health professional might say, I think that deep breathing and journaling are going to be two incredibly useful coping mechanisms for you. As an occupational therapist, I can then find the way to integrate that meaningfully into your routine so that you don't even have to think about it. Mm-hmm. So we can build the routine together so that you are regularly doing those very great coping mechanisms that are recommended by the mental health counselor.
Wow. Just a reminder, I'm speaking with Alyson Stover of Capable Kids and Capable Families. We can have those linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. What's next for you, Allison?
So I'm currently serving.
Are you going to medical school?
I've said that. My husband says no. He says,
"Are you done with school?"
Yeah, I'm done with school. So I'm currently serving the next 3 years as the president of the American Occupational Therapy Association. So my goal and plan is, to to really be very intentional these next 3 years about spreading this news, spreading this word, and finding ways that the collaboration can happen more organically. So for a long time, occupational therapy has been viewed as a rehabilitation profession that collaborates nicely with physical therapy and speech therapy and lives in a medical world, a medical model world. We do certainly do that. That's absolutely one of the lenses in which we view, but I think we are we have an incredible opportunity to really, particularly as we are seeing the increase in mental health experiences, how do we meet the needs of our community, but also make sure that we're not burning out the professionals that are providing that pathway to healing. And so I'm being intentional about finding organic ways to unite the mental health community with the occupational therapy community so that we can be a force of healing and wellness, a pathway to recovery, but also that we're being able to take care of ourselves and not burn out.
Awesome. Allison, what's the best way for people to contact you, to reach out?
Yep. So email is the best way. And my email address is, you can either look up Alyson Stover at the University of Pittsburgh, or it's just A.D. Stover at pitt.edu.
Okay, we'll have that linked up. Allison, amazing, really, and so friggin' inspiring. I'm so glad you came on this podcast. It was a pleasure meeting you, and I'm gotta have you back at a later date.
Yes, thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Thanks.